right, super, great. Well, hi everyone, thank you so much. Thanks for those of you who've been throughout the whole day. It's been really inspirational. So thank you so much to all the organizers, and it's been really inspiring and shocking in some cases, and also, really terrific to be able to share this information. And so thanks for hanging with us for the last session of the day. I'm Kristen Sykes. I'm the Director of Southern New England Conservation Projects and Partnerships with the Appalachian Mountain Club, and I am based in Holyoke, Massachusetts. And today I'm going to talk about the Connecticut River Paddlers Trail and the New England National Scenic Trail, two long distance water and land trails that connect to cities, including Springfield, Hartford, in the Connecticut River watershed. So a little bit about the Appalachian Mountain Club. We're America's oldest conservation and recreation organization, founded in 1876. We have chapters from Washington, D.C. to Maine, including a chapter called our Western Mass chapter and a Connecticut chapter. And our overall mission is the protection, enjoyment, and understanding of the outdoors. Just to frame things out and to zoom out a little bit, I'm going to talk about the Connecticut River watershed, which is 7.2 million acres in Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. There are almost 400 communities representing almost 2.4 million. And it shares the same boundary as the Silvio Conti National Fish and Wildlife Refuge, which is the only refuge that shares the same boundary as a watershed. And it has the distinction of being the only national blueway, which was dedicated in May of 2024. So as many of us who have spoken today and other nonprofits and volunteer groups, much of the work we do is through coalition. So I'm on the executive committee along with Mary and others with the Friends of Conti, which is a real range of organizations and private organizations and agencies that all work on protecting and promoting the Conti Refuge. Since the time that the Conti was created, over 16,000 acres of land have been protected by the Land and Water Conservation Fund, and we are hoping to protect a lot more in the future. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Connecticut River Paddlers Trail. It's a series of primitive campsites and access points along 410 miles of the Connecticut River, from the headwaters in New Hampshire all the way to the Long Island Sound. And the Appalachian Mountain Club has been leading an effort to expand the trail south from New Hampshire and Vermont into Massachusetts and Connecticut, with the goal of developing campsites every 5 miles. And we've completed all the way down to Enfield, Connecticut, and then we have a gap, which I'll talk about in a minute. And if you're a paddler, stand-up kayaker, stand-up paddleboarder, you can check it out at ConnecticutRiverPaddlersTrail.org. So I'm also part of the Friends of Connecticut River Paddlers Trail, which is a collaborative of partner groups and community members that was formed in 2009 to work together in trail planning and development, building and maintaining campsites, improving access points and portage trails, and disseminating information to visitors. So our main goal is getting folks on the Connecticut River, which I know many of us here today are interested in. So one way that we're doing that is through these Paddlers Trail campsites. And a little bit about these is, again, they're primitive. They each have roughly about 2 tent platforms that accommodate 10 to 12 people, an informational kiosk, a bear box, which a lot of places actually have a number of bears, as we know. People have seen them in their communities. Old moldering privy, which is a form of kind of composting outhouse. Many of them are first come, first serve. There are some campsites that charge a fee, and those of you who paddle in Connecticut on the river know that some of them you have to reserve ahead of time. And then a lot of them are leave no trace, so don't have fire rings, obviously pack out your waste, and really have as little impact as possible. So relative to the presentation today, the AMC has worked with a couple different organizations, including Holyoke Rows, which has a community rowing facility in Holyoke where they allow campers to camp on their lawn. They have access to an accessible dock and bathroom facilities. And then also last year, we built one working with the Conti Refuge at the new Fanny Stebbins unit of the Conti Refuge in Longmeadow, Massachusetts. And it's right across from Six Flags. So that's one of the features of that campsite, is right across the river. You can hear roller coasters and people having fun. So what's next for the Paddlers Trail? is we do have a 28-mile gap in Connecticut between the Kings Island campsite in Enfield and the River Highlands State Park campsite. So we've been working really hard in particular to find a campsite location in Hartford. We've been talking with Goodwin College and some other folks. And so hoping to be able to complete that. And then once we do, you'll be able to paddle all the way from New Hampshire to the Long Island Sound, staying at campsites along the way. And you can use your smartphone to learn a little bit more about how to access the river. Far Out Guides recently did a Connecticut River Paddlers Trail app working with AMC and the Connecticut River Conservancy. And you can see here, Springfield and Hartford. The app, I think, costs $14.99, and you can go on the Far Out Guides. It has lots of really neat things about where you can get provisions, where you can leave your boat, if you can leave your boat overnight. And if you look at some of the little screenshots down there, the parts that are black are boat launches. So it shows you in Hartford and Springfield how you can get on the river. And next I'm going to talk about the New England National Scenic Trail. The New England National Scenic Trail, otherwise known as the NET, and some folks know of it as the M&M Trail. It's 250 miles long, Connecticut to Massachusetts, and the Appalachian Mountain Club oversees it in Massachusetts, and the Connecticut Forest and Park Association oversees it in Connecticut. So we do have some really neat guides to help you get onto the New England Trail. I've heard from lots of folks in Springfield and elsewhere that there are these really great trails in protected lands and folks just don't know about them. So there's also a smartphone app for the New England Trail, which is actually that red line right there. So you can see how it goes close to Springfield and not too far from Hartford. There's also an interactive map. And the New England Trail does have a new campsite that was built recently in West Springfield and has a number of different cabins and campgrounds that you can stay along the way. So who takes care of this trail? And this is the case with the Connecticut River Paddlers Trail too, is it's really thanks to some fantastic volunteers. That photo on the left is some young adults from Holyoke that worked on a teen crew a couple years ago on the New England Trail. And then the photo, which is on my right, is students from the UMass Outing Club, which get to do some fun work like moving big rocks around. And in 2020, we had over 5,700 volunteer hours valued at over 150,000. And I'll talk about this in a minute. We had 1,500 hike participants. So really the trail gets primarily maintained by volunteers, and it's really thanks to them that it's in such great shape. So one of the neat things the New England Trail has done is to weave in arts to the trail. So we had a photographer, a poet laureate, and a keyboardist who basically came up with songs that he was moved to do based on the landscape. Also a multimedia artist who did some really neat stuff with reenacting and highlighting folks of color and Native Americans' ancestry along the trail in the Connecticut River as well. So the Hike 50 Challenge, which I believe is still ongoing, you can sign up for on newenglandtrail.org. If you hike 50 miles or earn 50 points and you submit your story, you can get a patch. And over the last 3 years, almost 600 participants have completed the challenge, logging over 50,000 miles on the New England Trail. Here's a couple photos of folks, including some small people that have enjoyed the trail. I believe that there was also a dog that did a lot of the trail. You can see you can do it in winter and summer or the fall. And just really a great resource here for people to be able to either see the Connecticut River or hike along the Connecticut River. And here's the website, so ConnecticutRiverPaddlersTrail.org and the New England National Scenic Trail. And we hope you check those out and use those as a good way to enjoy the Connecticut River watershed. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And it's my pleasure to introduce some UMass students that I've been really fortunate to work with on a really great project that they're going to tell you a little bit more now.
All right, hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming and listening to everyone's presentations. That was a great presentation from Kristen, and she has been our partner for this semester in our research issues and community development class. We're all community development majors, and we're really happy to be able to present today. So under the umbrella of access to trails and active transportation in Springfield, we are specifically focusing on the Connecticut Riverwalk and Bikeway. And although each of our group members individually is going to introduce themselves when they are doing their part of the presentation, as you can see, we have Alena, Conrad, Eli Grigorian, Joshua Holland, and me, myself, Greg Poelker-McKee. I'm a sophomore studying sustainable community development at University of Massachusetts, as well as economics. And as I said, we are partnering with the AMC through our community development class and examining the Connecticut Riverwalk and Bikeway in the city of Springfield, Massachusetts. This being said, although we are consulting with people from the planning department within Springfield, we are not working directly for Springfield. We are just studying the landscape and the various issues regarding access to the bikeway within the city. And if you're a little bit unfamiliar with geography of Massachusetts, you can see that Springfield is in the western part of the state, but it is somewhat unique in the western part of Massachusetts because it is an urban area, which makes it officially a gateway city, which bridges the gap between what is the primarily urban eastern part of the state and the then primarily rural western part of the state. And also you can see here, looking at the map on the right, that Springfield is a fairly large city with a 33 square mile surface area. And looking a little bit more into the demographics of Springfield, it is a population of slightly over 150,000 people, making it the third largest city in the state. It is diverse and predominantly working class. And then back historically, in the 19th and early 20th centuries, it was a center of manufacturing nationwide. And currently today exists in a somewhat post-industrial state. And also, it becomes very important to note regarding the rail trail itself that I-91, Interstate 91, was added in 1960 between downtown and the Connecticut River. And although it was really pushed for by the Planning Commission at that point, it now becomes an impediment to creating riverfront revitalization within Springfield. And here you can see how I-91 cuts off the downtown from the river. And you can also see, if you look closely, there's also a railway involved there, which comes right between I-91 and the river. And looking at the bikeway is then smushed in between the water, the railway, and the interstate. It's 3.7 miles, and it was completed in 2003, but did not meet their initial goals desired by the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission. It remains in a somewhat complete yet incomplete state that gives us a lot to work with moving forward. And you can see the southern end, it's cut off by I-91, and the northern end, it's cut off by a 10-foot high flood wall, which you can see in this top left picture right there. The neighborhood to the right, not pictured, is completely cut off from the trail itself, which exists on the left side of that flood wall. And you can see I-91 and the railroad tracks. I'm going to hand it over to Eli now to talk a little bit more about the history of Springfield and the state of the bike walk.
Hello, everybody. My name is Eli Grigorian. I'm a sustainable community development major, and I'm originally from Salem, Massachusetts. So a bit about the Riverwalk. So it was a project proposed in 1993 as part of the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission's revitalization project scope. So the goal here was to increase the value of Springfield's greatest natural asset, which is the river. Several communities were involved in this plan. However, as of 2003, only the Springfield and Agawam portions of the proposed 21-mile long trail have been completed. Next. So along this path, you'll find connections to Riverfront Park, seen in the left side of the slide, the Basketball Hall of Fame in the bottom right, and also to downtown Springfield. Here we can see MGM right near the water. So this bike path has the potential to connect to a bunch of large economic resources in the city. Next. So a bit about environmental justice communities, because the community we are focusing on specifically, Brightwood, is designated as an environmental justice community. So in order to be designated as an environmental justice community, you need to meet one or more of these 4 criteria, which mainly have to do with median household income, English language proficiency, and minority status prevalence. Next. So as I previously mentioned, this neighborhood, Brightwood, in the northwestern corner of the Springfield city, is designated as an environmental justice community. It has a minority population of about 95%, a median household income of about $24,000, which is almost a quarter that of the average for Massachusetts. And its non-English speaking community is about 30% of the population. Next, please. So a bit of the demographic breakdown of this neighborhood. It has a population of about 4,000 residents, with most of them being younger than 65 years old. And as previously mentioned, it has a large minority population, with about 80% of the population being Hispanic or Latino. Next. So a bit of the background of the neighborhood itself. So it was historically a manufacturing region within the city of Springfield. And a lot of the housing stock was built for workers in the Wasson Manufacturing Company. However, in the 1930s, there were 2 floods that pretty much leveled the area. And then in the 60s, an urban renewal plan was proposed, which wanted to increase the high density residential stock along the riverfront. And also in the 60s, we saw the construction, as previously mentioned, of I-91, which cut off much of the north end from downtown Springfield. So it cut off Brightwood. And then in the 1980s, there was a rezoning of this area, which in part helped to bring along the medical district, which we'll see in the next slide. So as you can see here on the left, that's just an aerial shot of some of the medical campus along Wasson Avenue. In the top right corner there, that's some of the high-rise, high-density developments that took place as a result of the urban renewal plan from the 60s. And then in the bottom right, we can see some of that, what is now the current housing stock in the Brightwood neighborhood, sort of that low-density suburban layout. Next. And so just a bit about sort of why we're looking at open space and recreation in this neighborhood specifically. Almost half of the residents don't own a car, and there are relatively high both obesity and asthma rates in this community. So we're looking to, we're researching sort of why that is and ways that access to open space and recreation spaces can be increased to help hopefully mitigate some of these afflictions. And now I'm going to pass it along to Josh.
Hello, everybody. My name is Cameron Joshua Holland. I'm a UMass student, a junior, pursuing a bachelor's degree in sustainable community development and a concentration in built environment. Pleasure to be here today. Glad I could speak with you guys. Looking here on the left is a picture from our first site visit to the path itself. This path stretches for approximately 3.7 miles. Like Greg said, it's about 6 to 8 feet wide. Unfortunately, about a mile of that is cut off by this flood wall on the left, which cuts off also 80% of Brightwood's exposure to the path itself. It's about 5 to 6 feet tall on average, but at its tallest, it's 10 feet tall, completely cutting off any view of the path. Next slide, please. Engagement was a huge part of this project. We spoke to a lot of individuals who helped us better understand the area and those who were trying to do service. We spoke with Scott Hansen, who is a former city planner of Springfield, and he helped us on our second site visit kind of go through the more intricate details of the flood wall and why it's been a detriment for so long and why they can't really do anything about it. Unfortunately, the flood wall is managed by the Army Corps of Engineers, and if any alterations are made to it, each household in Brightwood could be looking at $5,000 more a year in flood insurance, which with a median household income of about $24,000, that is simply unaffordable. I also spoke with anonymous Springfield residents who I didn't put in their names because I didn't ask their permission to. I wasn't sure what where I was going to go with that information, but they often felt upset about the promise of developing this this path over and over again. They even got kind of upset with me as I was asking them questions because so many people have come up to them and said, hey, what would you like to be seen with this path? And that's been happening since 2003. A few of our members also went to a Walk Bike Springfield meeting, and one of the landscape architects at our school mentioned that there's just so many people involved with this project that it's very hard to get stuff done. Next slide, please. Here's some of the statistics. As you can see, most of the users use it as a scenic route, and almost little to none use it as a convenient route, which is not what you like to see. You'd like to see that a little bit closer together. Most people access this trail by walking to it. There's not many people that bus to it nor drive to it. The Riverwalk is used most about 2 to 3 times a week during the week itself, which implies a heavy lunch rush and those who are just looking to take a walk from the medical district during lunch or their breaks. Next slide, please. Here is a case study of the riverfront recapture in Hartford, Connecticut. It's kind of an example of taking a dead space like this and revitalizing it to something that the community can all enjoy and really cherish off of. This project is done in a city that's very similar to Springfield and a very similar size to of riverfront. This recapture program successfully created 452 more acres of green space that has helped 750,000 people in 2020 alone, and probably double that by this point. Next slide, please. Here's a picture of the north end of the riverfront, not the riverfront, rather, the river walk. As you can see, there's a very close park, but when we did our visit itself, we weren't even sure there was a park there because there's absolutely no signage, no indications that there is a possible connection from the top north end of this walk to a green space and a public space nearby. As you can see here on the bottom too, there's this open, unused area that absolutely could be used in a more effective way. Next slide, please. Also, here's just a continuation of kind of a shortcoming of indicators about the path. This is the only signage we see with the Riverwalk, and it's simply an arch that is in the middle of the intersection, which is good, but it's the only indicator. It doesn't really show how long it is or what its purpose is. So the West Street and the North End entrance have shortcomings in that regard. And I'll be passing on to Alena.
Hello, my name is Alena Conrad. I'm a sustainable community development major with a concentration in the built environment. I'm also a Springfield resident, so I do have a connection to this path as I've taken it before. As you can see, Kennewick Park is central to the Brightwood neighborhood, and a connection between the park and the Connecticut River Bikeway would make an ideal pedestrian passage. However, the flood wall still prohibits access to the riverfront. During our meeting with Walk Bike Springfield, an idea was proposed to make a one-way, two-way street conversion on Riverside Road in order to widen the green space on the street side of the flood wall. With this additional space, an ADA accessible ramp can be installed. Traffic circulation in the broader area would need to be evaluated to determine if such a change would be possible. Next slide, please. In these two images, you can see what the flood wall looks like from street level and as well as above. As you can see from street level, you can't see the bikeway at all behind the flood wall. Additional suggestions for flood wall would be to improve the visual appearance. Springfield has already made some improvements by maintaining the cleanliness over the past decade as part of their effort to make the bike path safer and cleaner. Next slide, please. A mural along the flood wall would also be a positive form of beautification that could bring pride and stewardship to the neighborhood. A mural can incorporate designs that reflect the area's rich history and the current residents within the community, such as representing the Watson Manufacturing Company for the history, Bay State Medical as a current community stakeholder, or something that represents the Hispanic population in Springfield. Other suggestions can be made by the community themselves. The mural can also be used for wayfinding by adding words or imagery indicating the location of the bike path above the wall. Fresh Paint Springfield would be the ideal partner for such a project, as they have already conducted a series of successful murals in downtown Springfield. Part of their success comes from connecting communities to experienced artists. They also host painting parties where community members of all ages can participate in painting mural, no ladder or experience necessary. Next slide, please. North of Springfield sits the town of Chicopee. Chicopee is currently undertaking 2 river walk projects along the Connecticut River and the Chicopee Canal as part of the larger regional 21-mile project. However, the current plans for the Connecticut River Walk and Bikeway North only cover about approximately 2.4 miles and do not include a direct connection to the Riverwalk in Springfield. Those plans can be seen by the top image in black and white. Part of the challenge in creating this connection is the lack of available space to continue the bike path directly north along the river. That can be seen in the bottom left image, as current land use kind of cuts over where the path would be, and there's just not enough room between the river and the flood wall to continue the path. Work on the projects in Chicopee was scheduled to begin in the summer of 2021 and finish in the end of April 2022 with an estimated cost of $3 million. Next slide, please. Extending the trail south can offer a crucial connection to one of the largest urban municipal parks in the United States, Forest Park. Forest Park covers 735 acres of land overlooking the Connecticut River. Forest Park was designed by renowned landscape architect Federal Law Olmsted and features a zoo, aquatic gardens, an outdoor amphitheater, in addition to wooded trails and expansive views. Many plans have already been suggested to connect the Connecticut Riverwalk to the Forest Park. Currently, the southern end of the trail terminates at a dead end with no real connection to any location. So connecting the path to Forest Park would give users a destination and additional trails within the park. Extending the trail south does present some challenges which have limited the success of these past proposals. Not only is the Forest Park situated at a higher elevation than the current bikeway, but the trail would also have to go over an active rail line and I-91 in the process. Next slide, please. There's also the opportunity to improve connections between the Connecticut River Bikeway and the Agawam Riverfront Trail on the western side of the river. Both the Agawam Trail and the Springfield Trail are completed, but no clear connection has been made between them. Currently, users must travel alongside highway traffic over the South End Bridge over the Connecticut River. There are no protected bike lanes along this path, and once again, there are plans already that attempt to address this pathway, but the challenge is making a safe, convenient connection that users of all skill levels would be comfortable using. Next slide, please. Another issue that came up while we were doing a site visit was the amount of sinkholes we saw along Riverside Road, which would need to be addressed in order to create safe access for all users. Community members have stated that the sinkholes along Riverside Road have been a long ongoing issue. The Springfield Department of Public Works has stated that they've been working with soil engineers and the Water and Sewer Commission to investigate this problem. In November of 2020, the DPW was waiting on approval from the Army Corps of Engineers on their plans to address the issue. As of November 2021, no work has been done. The project is estimated to cost $6 to $8 million. believe that is it. So as you can see, there are major impediments to access, but also a lot of opportunities to improve. I want to thank everybody for their time listening to our presentation, and I believe I'm passing it off to Mary. Thank you. Mary, I believe you're muted.
Thank you. That was an excellent presentation. And I am going to play the slideshow. I just wanted to say I'm Mary Pelletier. I'm one of the 7 founding directors of Park Watershed, and I appreciate everyone for being here today. This was a great conference, and the presentations by Kristen and the UMass team were really fabulous. So what we're doing is we're looking at different pieces of the overall puzzle of how multimodal access to nature is being designed and is functioning. And my presentation is drilling down just one step further into the Hartford neighborhoods and the way that a regional trail is and a watershed is connects to the neighborhoods. And then will be followed by Greg Tuzzolo with more specific site-specific designs, and Craig will have a discussion about how we bring all these pieces together. Park Watershed was incorporated as a 501c3 in 2012, and this is just a map of the overall watershed. So we're really changing my work, even though I moved to Connecticut to work on bicycle trails, because I saw the degradation of nature 20 years ago now, and realized that a greenway wasn't a greenway unless it had nature around it. And the original specifications for bicycle trails were really 1-lane roads. And so the issue of where is the linear park around greenways was a concern of mine. And this led me down a long path that resulted in the North Branch Park River Watershed Management Plan, which was approved by EPA in 2010 and recommended the formation of a 501c3. So you can see here, Hartford is one municipality within the overall 78 square mile watershed. And that watershed is in the context of the Connecticut River watershed, which, as Kristen mentioned, is the Conti River, the Conti Refuge, the National Silvio Conti National Fish and Wildlife Refuge. And within the context of that refuge, Hartford and Springfield are the urban areas, and the majority of the population, much of the refuge is in these urban areas. And you can see the red is developed land and the green is forest or undeveloped landscapes. And Hartford is a particularly high developed watershed, an urbanized watershed, certainly in comparison to the Farmington River watershed, which is the 607 square mile watershed where our drinking water comes from. And this issue of it being an urban watershed and whether it is a Hog River watershed or a Park River watershed has been a historic debate since 1883. I found this anonymous editorial from the Hartford Daily Current that was dated February 27, 1883, that chides readers for calling the Park River a Hog River, and reminds everyone that before it was called the Park River, it was the Woods River, and this is referring to the North Branch. And sure enough, one of the first maps of all the rivers in Connecticut shows the Woods River listed here, which of course is probably why there are so many streets in the area called Woodland. So, but today it is not necessarily a wooded watershed. It is a watershed that is highly developed, and certainly it appears to be all parking lots when you look at it from a land use map. And when we look at a land use map, we see these tiny little green dots, and those tiny little green dots are in fact the nature in the neighborhoods. And it barely registers, but it turns out that the nature in these neighborhoods is actually considerable. And so here is where those green dots would be. And this is the overall North Branch watershed, which we'll be focusing on. And that watershed is 68% of the watershed is within Bloomfield. Here's the town of Bloomfield. 14% of it is within West Hartford, this is West Hartford, and only 11% of the 28 square mile North Branch Park River subwatershed is actually within the city of Hartford, but it is the lower end. So all of this area is receiving drainage from the upper watersheds that all are flowing south to the Connecticut River and Long Island Sound. So because of that, the upstream communities, because of stormwater runoff, combined sewage over, channelization, and flooding, the North Branch is listed as an impaired waterway. And that is where I found support. It was interesting to hear these presentations and the discussion about how we need to fund the work that we do. And the funding that Park Watershed has found is through work on improving water quality. And that is because of Section 319 of the Clean Water Act. And it turns out that stormwater runoff, the pollutants in stormwater runoff, trash, nutrients, suspended solids, pesticides, heavy metal, bacteria, and heat are the #1 cause of water quality pollution across the United States. So it's an interesting nutshell. And a lot of the work that EPA does focuses on water quality and not necessarily flooding. But what's common along the riparian corridor is increasing flood damage to parking lots that are within the North Branch Park River floodplains. And the floodplains are pretty well marked, but it doesn't necessarily mean that after 20 years of working on this project, we've managed to get any of them restored. And that's because parking is such an asset to many of the institutional property owners, or that there's just not the coordination and the incentives to revitalize these floodplains. But that is a curious thing, because many of the aspirations for the East Coast Greenway moving through Hartford are to send them along the North Branch of the Park River through the floodplains. And this is somewhat complicated discussion. As you can see, this is where the East Coast Greenway map is. And as we zero in on Hartford, you can see how the East Coast Greenway would come into the city of Hartford, go through Bushnell Park, and then down. And at this time, it runs on street levels up through towards Bloomfield, and then across to connect to the Farmington Canal Trail. But in the future, there's been a lot of speculation about running the bicycle path along the stream corridor. And a lot of my work has turned out trying to advocate for another way to run the bicycle trail in order not to divide our last landscapes. And this has helped me learn to articulate why we need nature in the city, but it's also helped me understand why bicycle trails in cities need to really connect to our urban communities and function as a community assets. Our riparian corridors are really fundamental ecosystem service benefits that we need to address the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. Our trees are storing carbon dioxide and they're pumping out oxygen, and they need to be in forests. There's a whole list of ecosystem service benefits They mitigate urban heat islands, especially as forests. They host biodiversity. They're critical habitat for endangered migratory birds. They intercept airborne dusts. They provide green infrastructure that reduces flooding. They prevent soil erosion. They increase property values. But a forest and large trees in cities are a liability, or they're a perceived liability, especially because our storms are increasingly volatile and increasingly problematic. And the way that the winds are blowing and the amounts of rain that are falling. So the issue of saving the forests along the riparian corridor and restoring the floodplains as sort of carbon sinks and ecosystem service benefits for urban neighborhoods is increasingly valuable. We just can't plant enough trees fast enough to replace our older mature trees. As you can see here, this 100-year-old tree versus the amount of carbon and the amount of ecosystem services benefits that can be provided by one planted tree. We need to be planting these trees for the future, but we also need to be conserving large forests in our urban neighborhoods now. And the volatile riparian corridor is a perfect place to make that happen because trees can fall over, and there can be leaf litter and intrusive roots, and there can be bugs, and there can be an unmanicured, chaotic appearance in this ever-changing forest. And that's exactly the dynamic life cycle of trees and rivers, that healthy ecosystems that actually provide our best benefits for managing the climate crisis provide. So what does those unmanicured, chaotic landscapes along riparian corridors offer us? Forests, wildlife pathways, aquatic life, macroinvertebrates, floodplains, migratory birds, insects. All of that is hidden in this forest, and none of that can be hosted the things that we need for bicycle paths. But these are very important areas that need to be protected. And we're hoping, Park Watershed is hoping, that the North Branch and the South Branch and other tributaries of the Park River can be protected as we move towards the 200th anniversary of Frederick Law Olmsted's celebration of this legacy next year in 2022. As you can see, Central Park, and this is a collage of Central Park, this roughly to scale, and the Emerald Necklace in Boston's. And these are all, both the Emerald Necklace and Central Park, of course, Olmsted legacy parks. But Olmsted walked along the North Branch of the Park River, and he wrote Charles Pond a letter about how to conserve it in 1871. So we need to address the climate crisis as we address what is a multimodal pathway. So I hope that people begin to think of how we want to bring bicycle paths through our neighborhoods. And one of the concerns has been the way our neighborhoods, the urban conditions in our neighborhoods, has been a barrier to those kinds of investments because of redlining. And of course, redlining has impacted investments in the neighborhoods. And that investment in the neighborhood is clear within Hartford, and may be one of the reasons why there hasn't been a willingness to bring the bicycle path through our neighborhoods and invest in our neighborhoods as an exciting multimodal place to be. And when we put a bicycle path within the neighborhood, we could also build nature back into the neighborhoods, back into the most heavily densified parts of our neighborhoods, and that would be good for people's health. So this is a study that was done by actually one of the colleges in Richmond, Virginia, and was picked up by the New York Times, that the red line neighborhoods of Richmond, Virginia, actually had less trees. So you can see the redlining in this slide here. And you can see the tree canopies were actually in the wealthier suburban neighborhoods. And what that did was that resulted, in hotter neighborhoods. And those hotter neighborhoods resulted in more stress, heat-related stress emergencies in those neighborhoods. And so what do we need to do to solve those? We need to build in green infrastructure, but we need to do that in places that aren't in the floodplain, that aren't within our more complex ecosystem services, and we need to invest in the neighborhoods. So this is a proposed line. Some people are calling it the Heart Line. Some people are, it was called the Griffin Line. And we're hoping to see how the East Coast Greenway could come through Hartford as a neighborhood asset and to begin to add things into the neighborhood like playscapes, a solar array, skate park, a bicycle shop, cafes, food trucks, a dog park, shared workspaces, community gardens, all of these things people want. There's space in this area between Homestead Avenue and the railroad tracks, but we need to drill down and look at those designs more carefully. So I'm going to hand this off to Greg Tuzzolo with Stimson so he can help us review ways to think of nature in the city in very site-specific ways and in very innovative ways.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. Give me one sec, folks. All right, I think this is it. Folks seeing my screen?
Yes.
Thank you. Let's see, full screen here. So hello, everyone. My name is Greg Tuzzolo. I'm a landscape architect with Stimson Landscape Architects. Tell you a little bit more about the firm in a moment, but I'll just mention that I am an alum of UMass, the landscape architecture program. So very glad to be back and connecting with both students and with Mary, who I met while a student there about 15 years ago. So thank you for inviting me. I'm just going to be talking about this theme of cultivating urban ecology, which I think folks have touched on in a number of ways. And I want to look at some ways that our firm has been able to pursue this goal in a variety of contexts over the last, say, 5 to 10 years. So first, really quick, just about us. We're a landscape architecture practice of about 35 people. We're based in Cambridge and in Princeton, Massachusetts. So we have both a rural and an urban presence and studio. One thing that sets us apart, aside from our urban studio, is a farm and a rural studio in Princeton, where we manage and operate a tree nursery and actively participate in the cultivation of plant material that we use on our own projects. I think that gives us a unique perspective on the sort of realities of planting, both in a variety of different environments. But I think planting in the city is really what we'll talk about today. A couple examples here of beautiful landscapes that we've recently completed, but these are all built on structure, all three of them over top of different types of structured space. And it really requires, I think, both the technical sensitivity, an understanding of architecture, and an interest in really kind of doing what is needed to create these environments where plants can thrive. And really what that means, I think, largely is about soils, drainage, and then, of course, plant selection as well. And really an attitude of bringing the garden into the city. Another example of some of our work is a little more mundane, kind of on the periphery of some of our projects, but I wanted to talk about just loosely this idea of how we integrate parking into our overall landscape. So some quick shots of how landscapes are either cultivated around parking, or in some cases, parking is cultivated around existing landscapes and fashioned in a way to preserve existing trees as much as possible. An example here from UMass, the Southwest concourse, where our team worked to really create a concept driven by stormwater and reintroducing porous surfaces in an area some people might not think of as urban, but if you've ever been to Southwest at UMass, it's pretty urban. It's about the most urban thing you can find in, aside from Springfield, certainly in the Amherst area. So really just looking at ways to provide more absorptive landscapes, directing water and creating planted opportunities that integrate within all of the complexities of circulation in a very busy campus. One thing that we can't forget, of course, even though we're talking about ecology, plantings, et cetera, is that we are always designing for people as well, but are very often designing for people. So a couple examples, including the new design building at UMass, where we've successfully been able to create really highly successful gathering spaces for people of all kinds. And I think one of the critical things to think about building ecology in the landscape is that often it really needs to be incredibly tough. And whether that means, installing pavement where you really need it, it could also mean learning to use special techniques with soils, especially in lawns, et cetera, to structure that soil and guard it against compaction in areas where there may be, inundation of crowds and gathering for, graduation, commencement ceremonies, et cetera. And then finally, I guess just these sort of high level themes, this idea of engagement as a really powerful tool to, when as landscapes are either built or maintained, to really bring people of all types, whether, in some cases here, these are folks from our studio. And then in some cases in the upper right, these are folks from, this is in Lawrence, Massachusetts, getting out and planting. And I think, this is great in two respects. One, to actually, in many cases, achieve the installation, which oftentimes are run on a shoestring, but also to really help folks develop a deeper appreciation for what goes into creating a successful landscape and maintaining it over time. So I wanted to talk about 3 projects in a bit more depth, and I'll kind of go pretty fast here. We've got a bunch to cover, but a number of them touch on some of the themes that have been brought up already. So this one here is at Northeastern University in Boston, and we definitely are dealing quite intimately with rail, roadway, bike, and pedestrian circulation through the city. So you can see in the red is kind of the heart of the Northeastern's campus as you know it. Running right up the middle is the orange line and the Amtrak line, the Northeast Corridor. And then the project we are working on, the Integrated Science and Engineering Complex, really sits right at the crossroads between the main campus and future development for the campus, as well as to the Roxbury neighborhood, et cetera, to the south. And there was a big sort of urban design idea with this project, which is to create a new pedestrian crossing that would be available for the greater public. In plan view, here is the major building. There's a new building planned to the south, and then this slope walkway is really that conduit that carries people across. And you can see here, there's a new bridge element that connects, leaps out across. You can see in this kind of cross section, we're actually rising about 19 feet in grade from Columbus Avenue up to the point where we leap off and cross. And really everything, if folks know Northeastern, it's been a 50-year conversion from a giant parking lot into an actual campus. And this is really a continuation of that trend. This site was an abandoned, it was a parking lot, a series of abandoned former buildings, et cetera. So, urban fill, nothing really significant there. And so everything that you see, including the buildup of all the soils here, is completely artificial and imported. Starting with some big ideas on flow, both of water and of pedestrians, kind of took this high level concept sketch, and you can see this view of the finished early phase of the project, really carrying those ideas through, this being a large bioswale feature, some recessed planters and some extruded planters. Just wanted to show the kind of various layerings that really demonstrate that we really needed to kind of carefully consider circulation, opportunities for planting, and hydrology kind of all together in sync to make the scheme really work. And again, I was talking about before, just finding these opportunities for planting. All this stuff here, this actually is built on structure here. All these plant beds completely created from scratch, all the way down to the street. Again, a bioswale here, another bioswale to the left. I just wanted to show a picture of the bridge. But really, we worked quite hard to kind of just craft all these little moments to integrate planting as much as we could, and really give the overall landscape a garden feeling surrounded by plants and architecture, a sense of enclosure and real connection to seasonal beauty, et cetera. So just a few more built shots of the project. If anyone's there now, half of this site is ripped up because they're building another phase, but hopefully in about a year and a half, it will return to this kind of level. Again, a streetscape planting. And I just wanted to show really quickly here, just a little bit of the behind the scenes of what went in, and just to kind of indicate that building the infrastructure for the support for these plant communities is it's intensive, both in terms of coordination with utilities, drainage, et cetera, but also just really the investment in creating what I would call a 21st century or high performance urban design or streetscape, in terms of structured soil, aeration, irrigation, paving systems that minimize compaction over roots, et cetera, and really ensure that the trees are going to live a long, happy, healthy life. I'm going to shift gears and talk about another project that closer to the Connecticut River is part of the theme of the presentation up in Northampton. This was a park, Pulaski Park, which has existed for quite some time, but was renovated in about 2014, 2015 after a competition, et cetera. I wanted to just kind of highlight quickly. In the blue is a kind of conceptual sketch I put on top that really shows one of the major themes of this park, in the sort of reintegration of a hydrologic system into the park. And so I'll just show that here really quickly again. And then, so essentially what it is, it's a bioswale feature, a depression that runs as a thread through the site. There's a couple moments of crossing it. You can kind of get a sense of the depression there. And it actually, I think I showed here in this sketch, connection to the street. It's actually taking street runoff and moving it, pulling it off out of the catch basin and looping it through the park. And so I'll just give you a couple more quick shots. That this is that swale again. There's interpretive elements. There's integration with social gathering spaces. We also wove in a strong area of nature play, which is really very simple, just natural materials, logs, rocks, maybe one piece of equipment, but mostly it's kind of a multi-purpose space for kids to explore and parents to even sit. Again, these sort of very purposeful social gathering spaces that bring people and activity in. And then at the very end on the south side, an accessible connection down to the parking lot, which really can also, you can see here, the bike rail system is really meant to serve as, a connection between a regional greenway or bikeway and this sort of upper terrace or, downtown Northampton. Last one I'll talk about really quick is a really exciting project we've worked on in San Antonio, Texas for about 10 years or so. Originally called Volker Park, it's now called Phil Hardberger Park. And the main idea on this slide is its proximity to the Salado Creek, which is in the blue. So there's a sort of, and here's a pre-existing photo. It was a 300-acre inholding of agricultural land with a lot of invasives, et cetera. And I've highlighted Salado Creek in the blue, so that kind of runs right adjacent to the site. You'll also notice that the site is kind of split 1/3, 2/3 by this parkway. I'll just blast through these real quick. Some of our quick layering, looking at, you know, all the different impacts on the land, and really what starts to lead into a design proposal. This was the original master plan from 2008. And you'll see here that there is this notion of a land bridge, which does connect the two halves of the park together. Again, more kind of layered study. I'm just going to breeze through this really quickly. A lot of the park is this sort of restored Texas savanna. It's a very simple trails that wind their way through. But you can see here how the trails were integrated in a manner to preserve the existing trees, which are, you know, sacrosanct in Texas because they're incredibly slow growing. And also we filled the park with a number of really cool kind of pieces of architecture and other features, et cetera. But about, say, 7-8 years ago, the idea of the land bridge resurfaced, and there was a real political will that started growing underneath it. And so we picked up the effort and started to come up with a design. And so we worked closely with an ecologist to develop kind of a typical kind of cross section, and it's it was originally 180 feet wide, and value engineered down to 150, which was kind of our minimal size. And I wanted to just go through these quickly. A really cool long story on just pure structure and logistics, but you can see some fun images of the construction of the bridge. And here we are today. This was taken about 3 weeks ago or so. And so a lot of the vegetation is obviously still establishing, and the contractor is still kind of mobilized a little bit, but really exciting to see kind of how this came together. I just wanted to show, this is just a plan view right over the bridge, just to kind of share some of the zoning. It's a very simple kind of cross section, but the main thing to really highlight is the amount of buffer space that we needed to provide between the wildlife corridor and the human corridor, and then also on both sides, the north and the south, these massive steel walls that are 9 feet tall that really, you know, protect against oncoming headlights and the visual noise of the city. So the main goal here with this project was to make the park carry across the highway, and so that when you're on the bridge, you don't feel like you've ever left the park at all. And so just a couple parting shots from this project. Couple follies and moments, but you know, I think the human experience is really improved, and there's also a lot of signs of wildlife actually using the bridge and you know, contributing to the ecology of the park on both sides. So with that, thank you very much, and we'll be glad to pass it back to Mary. And I think you're on mute, Mary.
How do I get back to just the regular? So if I wasn't going to share screen, let's see if I do a stop share. Do we? There we go. Good. How about that? Excellent. All right. So thank you. Everyone's so, must say, wonderful. And I wanted to, before we hand this off to Craig, and who's going to nudge us into our discussion, I wanted to acknowledge that in the Hartford area, we are on the land of the indigenous people, the Wagunks, the Saukeog, the Powanoks, Pakwakanoks, and the Tunxis, which are all within the Algonquin language family. And I may not be pronouncing these tribal names appropriately, but I must say I'm very proud of our current administration and Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, who's doing extraordinary work with the Department of the Interior and reconnecting to Indigenous peoples. So with that, and I wanted to just hope everyone reflects on our ongoing opportunity to cultivate an all-inclusive, nature-centric, abundant, and regenerative future for all life on Earth in honor of Indigenous tribes. So with that, I'm going to hand it to Craig. Do you have a first question teed up for us? And I also want to open up the discussion to everyone. Here, you can raise your hand or unmute. I don't think we're a large group, so yeah. And Craig, you're going to introduce yourself because you have a very important background in all of this.
Yeah, so again, Mary, thank you for inviting me to speak on this great day and this great panel. My background, I've known Mary for quite a long time. I was with Riverfront Recapture for close to 30 years in the development of this relatively complicated linear park system that now is a regional asset. Certainly incorporating a variety of towns, but understanding the importance, the historical significance, and the Olmsted connection in terms of the largest parcel of land just north of downtown called Riverside Park, where I was involved with a variety of trails and events that drew attention to the trail system, relatively simple trails that people could access, whether it was running or biking, and also then on the actual paved trails that connected the 4 different parks, both north and south, on the west side of the river, and then of course connecting over the bridges, the Charter Oak Bridge and the Founders Bridge, connecting into East Hartford, which is now opened up a variety of linkage to other trails. The trails that we created also in Riverside became kind of the play area for a variety of regional cyclocross events, and we even hosted the National Cyclocross Championship. So biking and connectivity in terms of what we did at Riverfront, and they continue to do. I now work for Knox Parks Foundation, which we are just about close to completing, probably within the next 2 weeks, close to, in a partnership with the city of Hartford, close to 1,000 trees to be planted throughout the city. Also, we manage 21 community gardens throughout the city of Hartford. And so our effort of environmental beautification work throughout the city, not only in the historical city parks, but linking and connecting the 17 miles, square miles of the city of Hartford is an important part. I think as you look at these trails and the system of the importance of trails and how we link everyone together, I think there's more and more work being done in the city of Hartford. And I think regionally, I think the answer and how I found to be successful at Riverfront is through partnerships and collaboration. I that's how we were successful. And I think I guess I would open the discussion in terms of how other folks and the different agencies that you represent, how you are finding that as a way of, one, communicating, two, collaborating in terms of carrying out this mission of connectivity and trails.
Let's hand that to Kristen. How about that?
Yeah, can you repeat that again, Craig?
Yeah, so I guess, what efforts are all of the different agencies that are kind of represented today in this last session in terms of how you are looking to potentially partner, collaborate, kind of tie together with other agencies, because I believe that that's how we will be most successful in terms of the development, whether it's green space, connectivity, trails, that kind of thing. How challenging is that, or what are people doing?
Sure. Well, I'll start and then happy to hand it off to others. As Mary knows, I've spent a lot of my career working on the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which provides federal acquisition to new protected land, say within the Conti Refuge. but then also has a stateside funding piece, which does really try to connect trails, to provide community gardens, to provide accessibility for folks with disabilities. So in Massachusetts in particular, we've been working on utilizing the land water stateside funding in environmental justice communities, and also just really making more people aware of it. And more broadly, we've been trying to do that within the whole Connecticut River watershed. And so the Friends of Conti did a webinar a couple months ago that brought the stateside coordinators from each one of the state agencies that's working on the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And thanks to a bill that was passed a couple of years ago, the Great American Outdoors Act, actually it was only a year ago, feels like more. It's 900 million, which hopefully will be more in future years as Congress adds more funding to it. So it's a floor, not a ceiling. But I do think that that's really important to leverage other funding sources, whether it's funds from the Rec Trails program or community funds, community bonds. And I will say, just from my experience in Massachusetts, that there has been a lot of interest in trying to make trail connections, especially thinking about people who are utilizing active transportation for commuting in addition to recreation, especially during the pandemic with so many people using their bikes or foot as opposed to taking public transit. So I would say there are some opportunities that we've seen from the federal government and the state to really try to utilize things like the land and water to make those trail connections to those open spaces, and then to try to leverage other funds.
Yeah, great points. Other folks that have had success in partnerships or collaborations?
Well, I want to add to that because I've also participated in Friends of Conti, and we've just recently formed the Conti Urban Partnership, and so this effort is to try to bridge the state, the municipalities across the state. Yeah. So this is a great example of, by being part of the group of the Friends of Conti and knowing Kristen, I was able to invite her to this conference. And I think even creating this presentation for this conference has been an opportunity to collaborate, to learn from each other, and to understand where the gaps are. Like now we've all looked at and studied these presentations about all these successful trails, but also the gaps. I mean, even just around the Springfield and the Agawam trails it's really kind of fascinating. And I mean, I think we didn't necessarily address where does the Farmington Canal Trail go once it goes north, and how do you get there from West Springfield, right? It'll be interesting. I think we just working together, sharing information, we learn a lot from each other. And I don't know, does Greg, do you have something to say?
Sure. I guess the one thing that I wanted to add here, just having been, especially on the Hardburger Park project, having been really involved on supporting the kind of furthering of a big idea and watching it evolve through a political process over 3 or 4 years. Just really wanted to highlight from my perspective, our role, the role of designers in that process, in terms of helping to visualize and put some kind of tangible image of some of these ideas in front of people. And I just it's something that really a lot more of my colleagues than myself, but we're trained to do this. We have great experience and expertise, and just in terms of kind of finding the role within the bigger all of these cross-cutting disciplines and et cetera. I just want to highlight that I've been trying to focus our firm as much as I can on providing that kind of critical service to clients and groups and organizations that are trying to push big ideas. There's so many different things that go into kind of putting a plan together, that in terms of lining up funding and all that, but what we can offer is a visual representation at the human scale, and something that can really stick in people's mind and get people excited. And so I just wanted to kind of advocate for for that part of it, which I'm sure folks appreciate. But in terms of playing roles and then planting the seed and then allowing everyone else, the policymakers, politicians, et cetera, to go do their great work with some ammunition in their pocket, I think is proven that in what I've seen to be really effective.
Actually, I would weigh in on that because I'm actually a designer by training. I went to the Rhode Island School of Design, and I do think that we're really missing in Hartford and maybe Connecticut. There's a lot of planners, but I think a lot of the planning processes often have goals. They have design goals. I thought the UMass team presentation was wonderfully analytical and objective about what the opportunities are, what the circumstances are. Is so helpful in sort of laying it all out. And then, but that kind of overview doesn't replace the opportunity to share a vision and to put out kind of site-specific human scale visions of what else it could be, what innovation changes could transform the landscapes. So the UMass team, would you add to that, or do you have thoughts about collaboration? Yeah, you're the team working as four, interviewing a lot of others in the process.
I do apologize that my experience isn't as advanced as you guys, but when you talk about like getting community partners and being a Springfield resident myself, like things that came to mind to me, like I mentioned the Fresh Paint Springfield, which is already a nonprofit working in downtown Springfield to make murals. But I also think of like other stakeholders in the area, like especially in Brightwood, there's Bay State Medical, as it's a huge medical district down there in North End. We also now have MGM Springfield moving in, and I know these are like to some people just big companies, but I also see the opportunity for partnership to get funding for these kind of projects, for them to connect with the community and reach out to the people they are servicing and kind of give back a little, kind of goes both ways. Sorry, I'm not sure if I have much more than that, but
I was going to make a comment.
Michael raised his hand. Go ahead.
Hi. Well, great to see you all. So I teach at UMass Amherst and have done different design studios too with Springfield. So I guess Greg's comment, I think, was good from Stimson, that designers can provide the vision. I think one of the, of course, benefits of talking about connectivity, I mean, it's a beautiful metaphor for people to work together, but it's also a weakness, I think, for the politicians. That's what I think the part that Greg mentioned is that when I see so many visions and plans for Springfield, but they're looking for the casinos, I have my own biases here, but typically a lot of times cities, especially the post-industrial variety, which are often, they have an inferiority complex. And so they're looking for the big ticket projects. And I think sometimes the connectivity and the paths, they may not take as seriously. So that's why I think it's great for Kristen and others, the rest, everybody on this call, I guess, in this presentation, that can advocate and raise the visibility, because in so many different places I've seen advocacy around linear parks and pathways. And that's where I think where you can get some traction, no pun intended, so I think I'm very hopeful, I guess, that things are changing too, I suppose, but I think thanks to everybody for your advocacy and visions for increasing connectivity and for bringing landscape really into the field of urban design, which of course, my day, it just was not, so great to see these possibilities.
And I wonder, Lynn Johnson, can you weigh in with us? Can you unmute yourself? I'm wondering if she's there.
I actually have something to piggyback off of what Michael said.
Yeah.
I think that there's definitely merit in what he said about post-industrial cities looking for the big ticket items and not necessarily trying to focus on the direct needs of its citizens and the connectivity and the accessibility. But I believe that big ticket items come from numbers. They come from the amount of people. So if you have more people that are looking for a casino, they're going to build a casino. But in order to up those numbers in the first place, you have to cater to the numbers themselves, which in this case are the people. So I think that starting small and focusing on connectivity is absolutely the pathway to those higher developments. That's all I have to say.
Actually, I think, I must say at one point in one of the discussions, they said, the economy needs transportation. And I do feel like this sort of assumption that our economy depends on commuting is one of the biggest, if there's any way we could turn this freighter ship, this big, I feel like this is this big, aircraft carrier that's the economy, and it's all about commuting. It's about cars and electric cars and money for highways. And we could just recognize that people actually are kind of sick of commuting, and we want walkable and livable neighborhoods, and we want, more self-reliant local economies, and that building those is a new economy. Rebuilding our local neighborhoods will build all the jobs you might burn on building a new hot lane to a highway or an electric car infrastructure. And that maybe this focus on building those walkable, livable, self-sustaining neighborhoods is the way to diminish the commuting, fossil fuel burning economy. I mean, that's my observation. What are others thinking? And I think we have maybe one more comment, and then there is a at the end of maybe at 7:29 there's a little video. So but does anyone else have any comments? Thank you all for being here and staying with this.
Mary, I just was going to say, hopefully when the Build Back Better bill passes, a significant piece of that is the Civilian Climate Corps, which is a updating of the CCC, which we know still has a lot of infrastructure that exists. A new redevelopment of a park in Holyoke has the old wall from the 1930s that still exists. And that there's really some thoughtfulness into educational incentives for folks who do that in all different age groups. And it really, I think, does kind of answer some of the question that sometimes happens in communities where there is a lower socioeconomics of like, well, what about jobs? What about opportunities? And to, maybe have an opportunity to have a job that's working to make your community better and then has an educational piece to it, I think could be really terrific. So fingers crossed that it moves forward, and that we have some real champions in our congressional delegation here, including Senator Markey from Massachusetts, that's been fighting for that. So I think that could be a real boon if we can be able to get that and provide jobs, education, and also this rebuilding that we really need.
Totally.
Just before we wrap up, I just want to say on behalf of me and my group members, just thank you very much for having us here today one more time. Really, it's a pleasure sharing our research with you, and just want to thank you one more time for inviting us to this. It was a great experience.
Totally excellent. And you guys did a great job. And just remember, it's been recorded. And I know I already know a list of people who want to see the recording. So feel welcome. I don't know when they'll be sending it out to share the recording, because I do think this was it was a great, all parts of it were very informative. So thank you very much. And so with that, have a great evening. Happy Thanksgiving.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Valerie Fernandez. I got involved in sustainable transportation and environmental justice as a Transport Rifle Ambassador. Now I'm currently a sophomore at the Connecticut State University studying criminology and sociology to become a lawyer. I want to thank you all for attending to our summit. I am so glad that you were able to join us today in this stimulating discussion. Please let's stay in touch. You can sign up for a newsletter, you can attend to our events, and even sponsor or work for us if interested. We hope to see you around.